When you think of luxury headphones, Focal, Audeze, Meze, and Denon pop in your mind, among many others, I'm sure. Ridiculous prices, absurd designs, and awful accessories are the hallmark of luxury headphones. But there are some companies that offer a lot more for a lot less. Shure, Sendy, and even Beyerdynamic from time to time excel in build, accessories, and presentation, to say nothing of the individual performance. Then there's Cleer Audio. You can be forgiven for never having heard of them before. They are not a big player, but they do have a big, top-of-the-line headphone which they call Next. This headphone costs $700 and was released to limited fanfare a few years ago. Let's take a look at what the Cleer Next has to offer. Cleer Audio says that the Next is a, quote, high-end audiophile headphone for discerning listeners. Every company says that. Cleer says that the Next provides bold, accurate, high-resolution sound. They say that the Next will evoke an emotional listening experience. Other than these very vague, very limited comments, Cleer makes no additional statements regarding sound quality or signature. Instead, the company spends a lot of time discussing the overall design and luxuriousness of the headphone. When you scan through the product page, you're greeted with sketches of the headphone, driver diagrams, and promises of exquisite build. Then, when you scroll to the bottom, you're shown Cleer's other headphones, and truth be told, there's a huge gap between the other stuff this company sells and their flagship headphone. When you first look at the Next, you might imagine that this is a planar magnetic headphone. It's as large as some planars, but it isn't. This is a 40mm dynamic driver. The next thing you might think is, wow, speaking of luxury. Yeah, there's a serious dose of leather and metal alloys in this headphone. The headband and earpads are real leather and seemingly top quality. They are supple and smooth to the touch. The earpads are deep and present a cavernous space for your ears. The ear cups have horizontal and slight tilt adjustment. The Next comes with a premium leather carrying bag, and I do mean premium. This bag is thick and has a velvet lining. You also get a limo cable, which itself is well made and leaks better than the penny-pinching plastic-covered cables Audeze throws in with their pricey gear, and a vast improvement over the non-detachable vacuum cable Grado graciously forces on us. The Next cable is thick, but fairly pliable. As for comfort, two things stand out. First, how light the Next is. Second, how fully enclosed and comfortable the earpads are. To me, the clamping force is perfect. It seems to be just a little bit less than the HD6XX. The cable transmits no audible microphonics. I can easily wear the Next for 3 to 4 hours before needing a break. Overall, the Next is luxury through and through. The generous use of leather and premium accessories and the unique design scream top-tier product. The comfort is, in my opinion, outstanding. The only significant issue, yet again, is a failure to include replacement earpads. This is quite annoying given the price and the fact that these are proprietary earpads. A second set would have been justified. To test the Next, I used it with various devices. I plugged it into my RME 80i2 DAC, Burson 3XR, Brooklyn DAC Plus, Low 2 PAW 6000, and EcoZerta ITM03. I used the stock accessories and listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. The Next is very easy to drive. It is 16 ohms with a sensitivity of 92 decibels, which means that you can use it with or without an amplifier. My tests indicate that the Next has close to neutral bass response. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, there's a rumble from the beginning which builds into a crescendo. The Next presented this detail. The rumble was a little bit louder on the neutral Olo S4X in comparison. Transients was marginally faster on the Next. When the crescendo hit, the Next separated every instrument including the organ. The rolling thunder effect was audible but not emphasized. Indeed, on the S4X, this rumble was a little bit more obvious. When the vocals chimed in, they rose from the background until they were shoulder to shoulder with the instruments. In Conquer by Overwork, there's a rolling marble sound at the beginning. This pans from right to left to center. The Next presented this sound and the panning. There are multiple drums in this track, and each drum strike was hard, but not sharp. There was little to no melding from one drum hit to the next. I listened to several hip-hop songs, including Pure Water, New Patek, Reel It In, and Uproar. On each occasion, the necks presented the sub bass and slightly underemphasized it. The subwoofer always sounded like it was at the other end of a medium-sized room. The vocals were about 2 steps ahead of the instruments and retained their sparkle. The drums were a little bit louder than the sub bass. I listened to my Sicario playlist. I used these tracks to determine if there's any audible bass distortion. Traversing from low to high volumes, I could not hear any distortion. Overall, the next has close to neutral bass rendition. There seems to be a slight sub bass roll-off. The next has clear separation between sub bass and mid bass. My tests indicate that the next has forward and slightly sibilant vocals. In Orla Gartland's Why Am I Like This, there is natural vocal grain and sibilance mixed into the track. The next presented both details and marginally emphasized the sibilance. This was confirmed when I compared the next against the more neutral Aventone planar. The next sibilance push was similar to what I heard on the Olo S4X. It was without doubt far less than what the HD560S does. Orla's voice was 1 to 2 steps ahead of the instruments. There was obvious separation among the various instruments. In Want You Back by Haim, the next again showed that it slightly emphasized vocal sibilance. This was similar to what I heard on the Olo S4X. At 8 seconds into the track, the primary singer says the word "we" and drags it out, making it sound gravelly. The next rendered this detail. There are 2 backup vocalists, one in either channel. The next initially presented all 3 vocalists clearly with their individual tonalities. When the instruments played at maximum, the backup vocalists remained in the background but retained their individual tonalities. The drums, bass, guitar, and piano were all separate from each other. The vocals remained 1 to 2 steps ahead of these other elements. In Superposition by Young the Giant, the next presented the ukulele, drums, and bass. All these instruments were distinct and clear. The primary male vocalist was 1 to 2 steps ahead of the instruments. His vocal sibilance was not emphasized. There's a backup vocalist whose voice is layered beneath the primaries. Most headphones cannot reveal this subtle detail. The next, however, did render the layered voices. Between 1 minute and 10 and 1 minute and 20 seconds, there are sharp intakes of breaths. The next presented this detail. Overall, the next has marginally forward mids. Female vocalists have a slight emphasis in sibilance. There is noticeable clarity among mid-centric elements. My tests indicate that the next has close to neutral treble, with perhaps a very slight emphasis in the upper treble. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the next presented the brass and horns clearly. Their nasally signatures were easily audible. However, the higher-pitched notes seemed marginally emphasized louder than what I heard on the more neutral Aventone planar. This emphasis was similar to what I heard on the Olo S4X. The timpani was audible, but it did not drown out the other instruments. Indeed, all group sets were separate from each other. The next has width, depth, and verticality. In other words, some instruments seemed further out into the wings, some sounded like they were deeper into the room, and sometimes sounds came from above or below. In Flight from the City, the next made the piano sound like it was 7 feet away. Its bassy notes had fast transients and seemed a little underemphasized when compared to the S4X. The cello was as loud as the piano and remained separate from it. I could easily hear the pops and sizzles and electric buzzing effects. I also heard the creaking of wood on the pianist's bench and the shifting of the cello's weight. In Take 5 by the De Brubeck Quartet, the next rendered the piano in the right, drums in the left, saxophone center, and bass 1 step behind. All instruments remained separate. The cymbals were as loud as the saxophone. The saxophone's higher-pitched notes were a bit louder than what I heard on the Aventone planar. However, it was similar to the rendition from the Olo S4X. The cymbals are struck at different positions, which should result in varying tonalities. The next presented this minute detail. Overall, the next seems to have fairly neutral treble until the upper treble, where there is a minor upward deviation. No sounds are harsh or piercing even at high volumes. Cleer Audio says nothing about the detailability of their flagship headphone. This is an interesting change of pace compared to the marketing we see from other brands promoting their flagship, top-tier headphones. My experience with the Next left me with a distinct impression that it presents well above average detail and clarity. Being lucky enough to have the HD800S, Full Cal Cleer, and the Austrian Audio headphones, I have yet to hear details from any other headphones that these three have not already revealed to me. But I was pleasantly surprised to find that the next renders obvious, subtle, and even some nuanced details. While this headphone does not present the analytical dissection of music that the HD800S and Austrian Audio headphones do, the next does present an abundance of detail. Creaking of wood, shifting of a cello's weight, sharp intakes of brass, multiple vocalists, twangs of guitar strings, nasally signatures of brass and horns, these types of details are clear. For a more quantitative test, I used the song New Light by Kazuki. This track has layers of details, including the sound of children playing, wind, rustling of grass, synth, piano, and footsteps. I count the number of steps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. The Sennheiser HD800S presents 22 footsteps, the Full Cal Cleer, 18, the Austrian Audio HiX65, 16 to 17 footsteps, the HiX55 presents 16 footsteps, the HiX15 and X25BT present 13 to 14 footsteps. The hifi Matsundara, Avantone Planar, Sivka Phoenix, and Beyerdynamic DT1990 present 10 to 11 footsteps. The Monolith M1070, M1570, Sivka Robin, and Ultrasone Pro 1480i all provide 8 to 9. The audeze LCD2 Closed and LCD2 Classic each provide 7 to 8. The older M1060C provides 7 footsteps. The audeze LCD1 and HD6XX present 6 to 7 footsteps. The Neumann NDH20 presents 5 to 6 footsteps. The next rendered 11 to 12 footsteps. On my scale of detail retrieval, the HD6XX and LCD1 are the average performers. Any headphone that provides more or less detail is judged accordingly. So, the NDH20 would be considered as below average and the hifi Matsundara as above average. Here, based on this scale, I think the next has above average detail retrieval, rivaling that of the Sundara and DT1990. Cleer Audio says nothing about the soundstage we should expect from the next. Soundstage is the combination of what you hear depending on the original recording methodology, the tuning of your headphones or IEMs, ear pads or ear tips, and how you wear your gear. The next presents fairly wide soundstage. If you come from Beats or Bose headphones, then you might be blown away. But compare it to other audiophile headphones, and the experience might be a little bit more sobering. I have a soundstage scale. Once again, I use the HD6XX and LCD1 as my average performers. Headphones that have more or less soundstage than these two are judged accordingly. The audeze Mobius and all Beats headphones have claustrophobic soundstage. The NDH20 and ATH M60X have below average soundstage. The HD6XX and LCD1 have average soundstage. The Sivka Phoenix, Emotiva GR1, and Ultrasome Pro 1480i have average to above average soundstage. The hifi Matsundara, Avantone Planar, Austrian Audio HiX55 and X65, and LCD2 Classic have above average soundstage. The hifi Mandiva has wide soundstage. The HD800S has super wide soundstage. In my opinion, the next has soundstage similar to the Sundara and Avantone Planar. It is unfortunate when companies do not provide simple descriptions for how their headphones or IEMs are going to sound. It is incredibly frustrating to make sense of the vague marketing and the flamboyant, nonsensical, flowery language used by many audiophiles. Sadly, despite costing $700 and being a flagship product, the next sound signature will be a mystery to anyone who has not yet heard it. I think the next has a moderate deviation away from neutral tuning. It's not V-shaped, W-shaped, dark sounding, or analytical. It's barely even balanced sounding. Yeah, these are all audiophile terms that have very limited footing, so let's talk some specifics. It seems to me that the next has fairly neutral bass. There's a minor sub-bass roll-off, but a neutral mid-bass. Separation of sub-bass from mid-bass is clear. Transients is a little fast, though not quite as fast as on planar magnetic headphones. The mids are slightly forward. Female vocalists will receive a minor sibilance emphasis. Mid-centric elements are distinct, separate, and clear. The treble is close to neutral until the upper treble, where there is a minor upward deviation. Even at high volumes, the next does not make treble instruments sound harsh or piercing. The next has above average detail retrieval and soundstage. I suppose one way to look at this headphone is this. Imagine a neutral tuning and nudge it in the analytical direction. This is all still mystical. Indeed, there is no substitute to actually listening to headphones and IEMs yourself. Some people see a $700 headphone and say that is far too expensive. Others say it is not flagship material since it could not possibly compete with the several $1,000 gear. Whatever your belief, it's always best to keep things in perspective. We need to do A/B tests to figure out how gear actually performs. Here, we will compare the necks to the Audeze LCD2 Classic, the Sennheiser Ava, and the Beyerdynamic T1 2nd Gen. For these tests, I plugged the headphones into a passive AB switch. That switch was connected to my Brooklyn DAC Plus. I used the stock accessories. I listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. I try to volume match. The LCD2 has a more obvious sub-bass roll-off than the next. Transience is a bit faster on the LCD2. Separation of sub-bass from mid-bass is kind of a toss-up. Mid-bass impact, however, is similar. The mids are different. Both headphones have forward mids. However, the LCD2 has a greater emphasis of vocal sibilance, and it also emphasizes vocal grain. Separation of mid-centric elements is clearer on the next. The next presents vocals further away from the ears. The treble is similar. Both the LCD2 and next have an upper treble emphasis. It sounds closely tuned, but I think the LCD2 has a nudge greater emphasis. Separation and clarity in this region is more obvious on the next. The next renders greater detail retrieval and has marginally wider soundstage than the LCD2 Classic. The Ava presents a different bass response than the next. The Ava has a roll-off. Separation of sub-bass from mid-bass is marginally clearer on the Ava. Mid-bass impact is harder on the next. The mids are different. While both headphones push vocals forward, the next has less sibilance emphasis than the Ava. S sounds are sharper and piercing on the Ava in comparison. Vocals appear to be similarly far from the ears on both headphones, and both headphones seem to render similar clarity in this region. The Ava has a treble emphasis, particularly in the mid-treble. The next, in comparison, has closer to neutral rendition. The next upper treble emphasis is a bit less than that of the Ava. The Ava has similar detail retrieval compared to the next, but the Ava has ever so slightly wider soundstage. The T1 and next seem to have similar sub-bass roll-off. Transience is also similar. However, separation of sub-bass from mid-bass is more obvious on the next. Mid-bass impact is slightly harder on the next. The next is clearer in the bass region. The mids are different. The next has a marginal push in the mids and a slight emphasis in female vocal sibilance. The T1 has closer to neutral presentation. It does not emphasize sibilance. However, vocals stand about one step ahead of instruments on the T1, while they are clearer, more separated, further ahead of instruments on the next. The treble is also different. The T1 has a marginal upper treble roll-off. The next has a slight upper treble emphasis. Separation and clarity in this region is patently more obvious on the next. The next has greater detail retrieval. In my new light test, the T1 rendered 6 to 7 footsteps. The next has wider soundstage. Comparisons help us figure out whether we need to temper our expectations and whether hype is actually consistent with reality. Here, all four headphones have distinctly different sound signatures. You cannot mistake one for the other. While some share similarities, there is no copycat in this group. Whether you will like any of these products is totally up to you. Let's talk about luxury products, especially audiophile gear. Being an audiophile is not a thing of luxury. You can enjoy your music with anything. Products sometimes are marketed for luxury appeal because of their price tags. I mean, when a headphone costs $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 or hey, how about $4,000, surely that is evidence enough of how amazing it is. But that is not reality. Rarely do we get true luxury from luxury audiophile brands. Audeze, for example, includes really cheap cables even with their top-of-the-line LCD4. Hi-Fi Man struggles with build quality irrespective of the price. Focal has terrible customer service, to the point of being non-existent outside of France, and good luck getting any response from their headquarters. So, you see, luxury is complicated. The build could be superb, but if you get a plastic-covered microphonic cable, is it really luxury? If you have to spend more money to make it luxury, is it luxury? If the build and accessories are good, but the company will not respond to concerns or questions, is that luxury? And if you're rolling the dice with build from a particular brand, come on, that's not luxury at all. It's a crapshoot. I say all of this because we really need to stop thinking that price has anything to do with overall experience. And frankly, price rarely has anything to do with sound quality. When we look at the Cleer next, we are provided build that is indeed luxurious. We're given accessories that are top-notch. The company, from what I know and my interactions with them, seem responsive, or at least as responsive as audeze. But the headphone itself, the next, is it the luxurious headphone that you need to go out and buy today? No, not at all. Look, the next does some things very well indeed. It provides plentiful clarity and detail, a tuning that leans towards vocal emphasis and clearly seems to be different enough from the pack in which it runs. But this tuning might not be for you. You may want more bass, or less treble, or more treble and less bass, or sharper vocals, or any combination therein. The $700 price tag of the next does not indicate good or bad sound quality, but it does provide an indication of performance. Truth be told, the next does not outdo, in certain respects, a headphone that is half the price. Take a look at the Sundara. Both the Next and Sundara have similar soundstage, similar detail, similar clarity, so at least in these specific aspects, paying double does not mean you're getting twice the return. On the other hand, take a look at audeze or Beyerdynamic or Denon or Focal. Paying more money for their products does not mean you're getting less performance from the Next. And by performance, I mean soundstage, clarity, detail, placement, and separation. We're not talking tuning or sound signature. I think the Next is an excellent headphone for what it offers. Yes, in my book, it is luxury. It is certainly unique. Is it worth $700? Well, that depends on whether you like in entirety what you get from Cleer Audio. If you think that the Next might be an interesting headphone for you, then I see no reason why you should keep it off your list of headphones to consider. It is well built, has good performance, and a fairly unique sound signature, to say nothing about the looks.